Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. This is Dan, and this is the Having Initiative podcast. Today's episode is called Debate versus Argument, and I'm going to talk a lot about just the ways that people converse and some misconceptions I see about that and various things in that area. So you're going to see a lot of this, a lot of times in this podcast. I'm going to reference my second episode where I go into a decision or a kind of inventory process for analyzing what we know and what we don't know and how we know things. Because with debates, arguments, conversations, we talk about trying to back up our viewpoints, whatever they may be or whatever the circumstances might be, with evidence, and that's where what we know comes into play. Now, all the time in life, discourse is going to happen where we're going along our lives and we meet other people and we disagree. And sometimes you know these people, sometimes you don't, and that adds a level of complexity potentially to the situation. But people often say when they're having discourse, they refer to things as we're having a debate, or we're having an argument, or we're just having a conversation, that kind of thing. And sometimes people will be shouting, and when they're confronted by others, or maybe one party will say, well, no, we're just having a conversation. We're not mad. Or sometimes people can be talking calmly, and when someone's like, hey, what's going on? And they'll respond, we're having an argument. Stay out of this. And so a lot of the times those terms are used interchangeably. So today I'm going to talk about debate, arguments, and conversation. And these are just mostly my opinions on what these different things are. But that's based off of what I've seen and what a lot of people have the self-reports of a lot of people who are doing various activities. So on that note, let's get going. Okay, debate. This one word is thrown around a lot. And with the debate, we knowingly have different views going in. And sometimes the nature of typically, at least most people would agree, a debate is for the purpose of proving one view over the other, or basically trying to find the best path forward between the two. One is better than the other. That's why we debate the points. Now, sometimes it's rooted in one person will criticize the viewpoints of another without offering an alternative. And so the debate isn't about my point is better. It's just your point is wrong. Here's how. And then the other party will argue, well, here's why it's right. And sometimes when debating something, like I mentioned, with what we know and what we don't know, people will present evidence. Well, sometimes with debate, we have past experiences in world history or human events, that kind of thing. But we don't have evidence as to what could happen. Evidence as to what will happen for sure. And all we have are kind of thought experiments. And those are tricky to navigate because our thought experience are normally a byproduct of our thoughts, which are in our heads. And there's a lot going on with how our brains work that can't easily be transmitted from one person to another, even no matter how well it's worded. And as I mentioned with what we know and what we don't know, sometimes evidence, quote unquote, that is presented is just something that affirms our beliefs. But if we take a look at the so-called evidence, we'll find that it's not proof. It's just an assertion, or it's just anecdotal. It's a possibility, but it's not proof in and of itself. So it's not as damning as we'd like it to be. Since we have differing views, even if things are very civil, most would argue that we automatically go into some level of defensive posturing because debates are, as I mentioned, usually about proving one viewpoint over the other or one argument over the other. And so there's a inherent level of conflict or combativeness involved in that, and we have to defend ourselves. Now, as I mentioned with debate, it's typically about advancing one viewpoint over the other. Debate is, because of that, a bit of an art form. Now, we may typically, I mean, the best debate will be looking for truth, because I think this is better. Here's why. Okay, you think that's better. That's your answer. Why? So we're honestly trying to find out the best course of action. But and so that's where the evidence comes in. But oftentimes with debates, there's all these tactics that aren't about proving I'm right, or this proves my point, or this proves you're wrong, that kind of thing. It's just about swaying the perception of your arguments and making it look more right than it actually is. And I'll elaborate on this a lot when I get to arguments. But with debates, I mean, there's a lot of debates that are more combative, and they could fall under an argument, even though they do meet certain criteria. But a debate may not be for trying to win someone over. There's a lot of public debates that go on where they talk about, political views or scientific concepts, or better yet, morality, because that's at times incredibly vague and difficult to prove. And so whenever people are debating, they're on stage, it's being recorded, maybe being moderated at some university or at some convention, and it's being live streamed, or it's going to end up on YouTube. And it's not necessarily for one party isn't arguing to convince the other party. It's more so arguing for the audience to be convinced of their viewpoint. And that's where I talked about how debate is an art and how you're not necessarily after truth. That's where a lot of the dirtier tactics come in that have nothing to do with truth and who is more right in, I guess, objective terms. And sometimes whenever you're debating, it may not be to convince the person across from you or the audience. Sometimes it's trying to convince yourself of something, because it could be rooted in a feeling, and you're trying to, after the fact, justify your feelings, I guess, or your worldview. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, I keep mentioning how, debates can get combative or inherently combative, but they can be civil. And the thing that defines a debate most over others is that typically one party will express their case, and then the other will cross-examine. And then that's at least the bare minimum, because that goes back to what I said about how it could be about not two viewpoints, but one person is arguing that a viewpoint is incorrect. And so it's a defensive action on the part of the person arguing for it. And so there may not be the reverse of that, where, okay, now person A talks, person B cross-examines. Okay, now step two, person B talks, person A cross-examines. But as I mentioned in the podcast, What We Know and What We Don't Know, I went into a great deal about how there's this ideal way of communication where person A says their viewpoint, person B listens to it, and then recounts back person A's viewpoint, and then person A has to approve their recollection. But sometimes person A won't acknowledge what person B said, even if it is correct, simply because it didn't affirm person A's viewpoint. The person B accurately repeated what was said back, but the person B didn't seem to accept it as the truth, and so person A refused their recollection. Now, with that, this is where the whole concept of being honest with yourself, and are you in denial, or is person A in denial, or is person B the one who was incorrect? Now, in that situation I gave, yes, person A was wrong, but there's going to be times where you're debating someone, you're presented something that was done well or seemingly well, and you have to ask yourself, okay, how right is this? And piggybacking off of what we know and what we don't know, if you really want to have a civil argument, you both have to acknowledge what you know and what you don't know, because that's part of the contract of seeking truth. Now, again, I mentioned that I keep talking about what you need to do, but if you want to have a good debate, then both parties have to be involved. But again, you can only control yourself, so that's why a lot of these things, you, the listener, I'm talking to about what you should do or what you need to do, because only you are responsible for yourself. Now, when you're debating, ignorance and bias are natural and understandable. People will kind of be weaponizing, saying, you have a bias, and that is why you are wrong, whereas I am unbiased. Well, everyone has biases, and saying you're unbiased or going through anti-bias training, someone once said, being unbiased is simply being biased in another direction. We all have biases, and none of us know everything, so we're all ignorant to some extent. That's to be expected. Now, the question is, are you and the person you're debating acting in good faith? That's the key right there. That's the deciding factor. Now, as I said, you are responsible for your ignorance. You should try and learn as much as possible and not just go, this idea makes me feel good and it's my idea, so that's why I'm sticking with it. And your bias, again, we all have them, so you have to take an honest look and say, this is my bias, and if you see something that's not good about that bias, it's up to you to basically take that into account. But if it's since again everyone has a bias, we have to kind of go along with them at a time. Just be open to the fact that something that's presented to you, you may not accept it simply because it goes against your bias. So be careful of that. And as I mentioned, people will point out you have a bias. Everybody does. In an argument, it's up to you, or debate, sorry, it's up to you to show that your bias is correct or your bias does not affect your ability to refute their claims. And as I said, everyone has a bias. So in a debate, if you're going for the truth, you can point out your opponent's biases and show that they're not as purely objective as they would like to make out either. And that's a bit of a tactical or combative approach. And so that brings us to our next point, arguments. So with arguments, just like debates, both parties have differing views. The key difference with an argument, that again, this is kind of my interpretation of it, is you are in a form of verbal combat. I am right and you are wrong. Again, that matches up with debate, but there is no possibility that I am wrong, and there is no nuance in our disagreement, or there's no chance that you are partially right. I am right and you are wrong. In a debate, when you listen, yes, you can be arguing for your viewpoint, but there's the possibility that you might be wrong. You're open to understanding more. Not in an argument. You are listening to them solely for the purpose of finding ammunition in their argument and using it against them, showing how they are wrong. Like in the movie Terminator 2, Arnold Schwarzenegger plays a killing machine who is designed to kill humans, but he has files on human anatomy, and he's using it to patch up a human that's a friendly, basically. And the human points out that the medical files that he has are for the purposes of being a better killer, not for being a medic. And he just responds, correct. So when you're in an argument, if you're listening to their viewpoint, you're not listening to understand. You're listening to find their flaws and use it against them, or flip it against them in a way that's not true. And oftentimes with arguments, on the surface, it's for arguing one point over the other, but oftentimes it's for the purpose of hurting someone. Like if person A says 2 + 2 = 5, person B responds, no, 2 + 2 = 4. Let me show you, and they show how. And then person A says, your hair is stupid. Why should we believe you? That had nothing to do with the argument. It was an ad hominem attack. And for those of you that don't know, that's a kind of haphazard example. But you attacked the person, you didn't attack their argument. Now, it's called an ad hominem attack. I just like to call it being an asshole. But the point there was hurt, not, truth or facts or proving yourself, objectivity. It was for hurting the other person. Now, why would you want to hurt someone? It could just be because you want to win the argument, so you hurt them so that they can't fight anymore. Or again, if other people are watching, you could be arguing for the sake of public opinion, and making someone look stupid is a good way to quote unquote win the argument without actually proving the strength of your position. So with arguments, we have to ask ourselves, how much is really accomplished here? Now, if we're arguing for the sake of public opinion, we could have an awful experience and it could advance your standing with the audience and therefore the world or possibly society, however big this is going. But a debate may have sought truth. But again, like winning, quote unquote, the argument, a lot of the times that can be done with anything but truth. And so I talked about how there are tactics with debate, and some of them are more acceptable, and others tend to fall. I tend to fall that's not a debate tactic, that's an argument tactic. Is that I witnessed this happened where person A and B disagreed, and person A was battering person B with questions, not letting them get a word in, and they were normally quick. And so you think this? So you think that? So you think this? Well, how about this? So you're saying this? And person B was doing a good job of deflecting all of those viewpoints. But the key thing is that person B was on the defensive and was, even though their main viewpoint they disagreed, they got in the state of just refute whatever person A said. And so person A, who knew what they were doing, then threw out a viewpoint that person B didn't agree with. But since they were in a kind of defensive posturing, they started arguing for something they did not believe, simply because they fell in a loop. That's a trap. And it was so effective because I think this was it was live streamed, and so it was going to be, someone was going to archive it. They had person A got person B to defend something they didn't believe and had them like purely of their own volition saying that. And so it really kind of made person B look bad. But anyone who was listening anyone who's being objective could say, yeah, person B made a mistake. They don't really believe any of that. But we have it on tape. And another tactic for winning an argument is gaslighting. For those of you there's various ways to describe it, but the most common one I can think of is person B does numerous small minor infringements against person A to irritate them, but they're all seemingly benign actions. And then eventually person A can't take it, and then they blow up, using the gas metaphor. And then so it makes person A look like they're being irrational. And person B is like, hey, we were just having a conversation. And then this person exploded, whereas the whole time they were prodding the situation. And I mentioned, again, when we talk about getting someone on the defense and gaslighting, you can accomplish things in the public eye. But if you wanted to have a debate and someone else was looking for an argument, how much did you really accomplish? That's something. Or if you win, you use these tactics and you win. Yeah, you may have won the crowd, but your argument didn't win. Your arguing did win. And there's a difference between the two. Okay, so as I mentioned with the debate, people can be open to learning things and maybe changing their mind, maybe realize, okay, I was wrong. Maybe I need to reevaluate things or take into account something that you just presented. But in an argument, sometimes people can learn they're wrong, but will continue arguing anyway. And this is a personal example. When I was younger, I have sisters, and one of them, we were in an argument about something. I knew I was right because it was about something that happened. I knew I was right, and I proved it with recounting specific events that happened. And I got my sister to agree, not by force, but I knew that's what happened, and she agreed with me. But she kept on arguing anyway. She wouldn't concede that I had proven that she was wrong. And I got really angry, and so the argument got worse, and that's where things started getting, we started getting personal. I'm pretty sure we started attacking each other, not our arguments. And because it felt like there were rules where like, I am right, this is why, and she said, no, you're wrong, this is why. But I had proven that I was right, and she wasn't refuting the argument, but she was still arguing anyway. And so it felt like she broke the rules, and I wasn't in a good frame of mind. And after the fact, I eventually got out of her that, yeah, she knew that I was right and had won the argument, but for various reasons, she didn't want to concede. And so the argument went on. And that's something that happens a lot, and it's something if you're losing an argument, we don't want to lose. I mean, even if it's not that important, oftentimes we don't want to lose. And so that's something to bear in mind. And as I talked about, sometimes people will know they're wrong and will argue anyway. Sometimes people go in either knowing they're wrong or not caring if they're wrong. They go in just for the sake of arguing. And so the point of their argument isn't to prove their point or disprove yours. Their point for arguing is to make you emotional. And the easiest example of this is our internet trolls. They will say something inflammatory, get people to comment, and then just keep that fire going. And I can understand getting amusement from seeing someone I disagree with getting flustered. But again, I typically go for the point of proving something right, not solely for the point of making them upset. And so I don't fully understand what they're going for, but sometimes it gives them attention, and sometimes they just like to upset people. And maybe like I think it's a line in Fight Club where someone says, "I just wanted to destroy something beautiful." Maybe that's what they wanted to do. You know, some men just want to watch the world burn, that kind of thing. And with an argument, oftentimes parties, at least in the heat of the moment, won't take accountability for what they're saying or doing, that kind of thing. And I've seen people who are arguing use the ad hominem attacks or use those dirty tactics for that aren't based in truth but are based in, screwing over your opponent, or just gaslighting them or arguing for the sake of arguing, making them emotional intentionally. And then whenever confronted about this, they say, we were just having a debate and he or she couldn't handle it. If that's not my fault, you're just mad that you lost. And that's the thing about arguments that is the most upsetting, if someone won't even acknowledge that they were arguing. It's tough. So that kind of summarizes my views on arguments. Now let's talk about having a conversation or just discourse. And this one it's just a more tame version of a debate, to be perfectly honest. We hope for this to be the way in most casual, calm circumstances that we interact with. If it's someone that we know and we like them, if we disagree, let's have a conversation about it. No need to get rigid in the debate format. And that's what we hope for. And with strangers, I mean, we don't want to be having a fight every 5 minutes. So we hope that we're being civil and just having a conversation. And no need to start having a debate, because that would acknowledge that we care more than we do. And so generally with a conversation, they're specifically conversations where we disagree about something. We're trying to understand the other's viewpoint, and maybe we're open to being wrong. And it's more convincing the other rather than proving to the other, although proving may be a part of convincing. Convincing is a bit more, it's a less forceful. That's the differentiation I make. And there's a filmmaker who, an independent filmmaker or documentary filmmaker called Cassie J. And she was working on a film where she investigated a worldview that she at first was very much against, because in her view she didn't, but she acknowledged, I really don't know, I'm making a lot of assumptions about them. And she was really uncomfortable during that process of learning about something that she disagreed with. But something she said about that was that she learned was, if you seek to understand, you will never be offended. And that's something that really struck me as important. Now, the caveat to that is understanding someone that disagrees with you can be uncomfortable, because you could see that they're right, and that conflicts with your worldview or your view on things, and that can be an uncomfortable process. Now, conversations can become one-sided. If one person has a lot to say, they can just keep going, and person B may want to respond, but they don't have the temperament, or they don't want to be rude, and so they just keep listening, and one person just dominates the conversation. So if you have a lot to say, and you're going in a conversation, you want to have a conversation and not just, getting on your soapbox, you have to make a conscious effort to look at the other person. Because sometimes, I mean, you can look at a person but be entirely in your head and just spitting out what comes there. So a conversation is truly a give and take. And so you have to give others the space to talk. Now, if you're on the receiving end of that, you can try and make your stance to talk, but if the other person isn't going along with it, then you have to ask yourself, okay, are they going along with the kind of social contract of having a conversation, the give and take? And if they can't seem to adapt to that, then you might have a decision to make. And to wrap this point up, kind of piggybacking off of about being one-sided, or how I said earlier with debate is, in its best form, is about understanding. Something that I find is that one of the most unproductive forms of conversation is when you get two people together who both have a lot to say, even if they agree with each other. It's that, like, one person will start talking and person B will agree or disagree with that, and they have a lot of examples to articulate, and so then person B will hop in and start talking, and then the same thing happens in person A. They have a lot of information that they can share too. And then while they're both going back and forth, it doesn't seem like they're really listening beyond they're listening, and then they are immediately taken up with spontaneity about something the other person said, and that reminds them of the list of things they have to share. And then they start talking because this is important. This elaborates on your viewpoint, so I have to share it now because I'm going to forget otherwise. And so, yeah, there can be it seems like they're listening to each other, but not really. And so, at times, be wary if you both have a lot to say and you only have one conversation to say it in. So, kind of wrapping everything up there, those definitions are loose definitions I gave of having a debate, having an argument, and having just conversation. These aren't rigid by any means. These are kind of the ways that I differentiate them. There's maybe a dictionary definition of each of them somewhere else. And just because you start having one doesn't mean you stay there. A debate, I mean, we can have a formal debate on stage that's moderated and being broadcast on the internet. But just because we're technically having a debate doesn't mean that we have not fallen into an argument. Or that doesn't mean that we've fallen into just having a conversation. One can transfer into the other. Now, whether you use kind of my definitions or your own, something important to know is when you're talking to someone else, know which one of these you're in and see if they know which one of them they're in as well. And you got to ask yourself once you do that, is that what you want to be doing? Do you want to be having a conversation? Do you want to be arguing, or do you really want to debate? And then piggybacking off of that, if you're having a debate, at least on the surface, you have to ask yourself, are they being honest? Are you being honest? And ask yourself, what am I really going after? And with an argument, if you do acknowledge that you're in there, do you want to be having an argument? But also, can you really win this argument? And what would winning entail? Is it worth it? Those are the things. Because, I mean, I do believe that, I mean, arguments, they seem to happen naturally. Like, most people formally can agree to a debate at a time and place or just on the spot, but most people don't formally agree to an argument ahead of time. I mean, maybe if like you're having relationship drama, but even then you don't like, okay, we will argue at this time. It's okay, we will talk about our issues at that time because I'm at work right now or something like that. So with an argument, they occur naturally, and I'm tempted to say that they have their place. But when I think about what truly is an argument, at least with the things that I talked about, it's like these aren't really, I mean, the only thing that they could be useful for was persuading the crowd, but not really persuading the person across from you. And that definitely has utility. But at the same time, typically arguments aren't won for honest means or truthful means. There's some kind of slander or lie, or you made a caricature of the other person. So that's why I'm wary to say, I don't really want to say that they have their place, but they do happen naturally. So be ready. And as for conversations, honestly, just having a good conversation with someone is so great. You know, like maybe it's a stranger and you'll never see them again, but you just kind of connect on some level. You don't necessarily go into anything personal, but you're sharing thoughts. And like a lot of people have said, I hate small talk. I want to talk about substance. And I generally agree with that. And that's why I made this long form podcast. But, you know, sometimes just connecting with a person with small talk, it has its merits. Those moments aren't meaningless. So just something to bear in mind. So thank you guys for listening. If you've made it this far. And on that note, let's do a little housekeeping. Thank you, everybody. Hi, everybody. Thank you again for listening. This episode in particular, re-listening to it, it brought up a lot of like, ooh, okay, there's more nuance I could do there. And the definitions I gave for debate and argument, these aren't what I said in here. These aren't like official definitions in some body anywhere. They were kind of my interpretation of what I think they are. And of course, there's more that I could unpack with them. So if you have any particular issues or whatnot, just let me know in the comments. And yep, thank you again for listening. And if you'd like to support the channel, please like, comment, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and just share it around with word of mouth. Thank you again, everybody. Take care.